Welcome, everyone, to the Continuous Improvement Lab. This is Season 2, Episode 12.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into some really interesting source material. It was sent in by Verna Kendrick, so a big thank you, Verna.
Yes, thank you.
And this material focuses on some essential elements within management operations systems, MOS, things really designed to boost team performance.
And our mission today for this deep dive is really to cut through all the noise and pull out the most critical insights from these sources. It all centers around one key discipline.
Which is?
Driving discipline in closing out action items.
Yes, that. We've all been there, right? You leave a meeting, great discussion, problems identified, actions agreed, and then, well...
Then maybe not so much happens.
Exactly. How often do those things just sort of linger? This deep dive is all about why that disciplined follow-through isn't just, nice to have. It's absolutely non-negotiable for effective operations.
It really is. It's that critical bridge between knowing what needs doing and actually seeing it done.
Couldn't agree more. And just a quick reminder, please hit subscribe or follow on the show if you haven't already. You won't want to miss future deep dives like this one.
Definitely. So the material we have includes research bits, a really good case study, industry insights, all hammering home this point. Without that focus on closing actions, even the best systems can just, fall apart.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What's the core challenge the sources highlight?
Well, the fundamental insight they present is pretty stark, actually. It's that a solid MOS, no matter how well you design it on paper, it essentially breaks down if action items aren't followed through.
So identifying the problem, agreeing on the task in the meeting. That's only step one.
It's only half the battle, frankly. The effort is kind of wasted if nothing happens afterwards.
Right. So the second half is the critical part, the doing, the closing it out.
Precisely. The sources really emphasize that the necessity, the real power, lies in making sure those action items from every meeting are meticulously logged, tracked, and ultimately closed.
And that's not just a process thing, it's cultural.
Absolutely. Building that discipline into the team's basic way of working, that's what leads to a really significant uptick in actually solving problems and being effective. It turns all that talk into tangible, completed work.
That makes total sense. It's that classic gap between planning and actual execution.
Yeah.
Now, the source material uses a case study to illustrate this.
Yeah.
Atlas Precision Manufacturing.
Yeah. Atlas Precision, they specialize in custom machined parts, and they were a pretty classic example of this problem.
How so? They had an MOS, right?
They did. They had a structured MOS. They held regular meetings, daily huddles, weekly reviews, all that. They were identifying issues, just like they were supposed to.
Okay.
But the problem wasn't identification. It was that the actions they decided on, they just weren't getting resolved quickly. Many would just linger unaddressed, sometimes for weeks.
Oof. And what was the operational cost of that lack of closure?
It was significant, really recurring headaches. They had persistent equipment, downtime issues, maintenance tasks that were always getting delayed, quality defects that kept popping up because the root cause fixes they'd agreed on. Well, they weren't getting done.
And that hits the bottom line, I imagine.
Directly. Negative impact on productivity, and, understandably, it was hurting their customer satisfaction too.
So Alice pinpointed the breakdown not in the MOS structure itself, but really in the execution of the actions within it.
That's exactly where they put their focus. The leadership there launched a very specific, targeted initiative aimed squarely at driving discipline in closing those action items.
What did that look like in practice?
They set up a formal system. Every single action item identified had to be logged. It had to have a clear owner assigned. It needed a specific deadline, and its status tracked religiously.
Okay, logging and tracking. But how did they make people stick to it, the accountability piece?
That was key. They used things like accountability boards, digital trackers. Making the status of every action visible to everyone involved was crucial. Transparency.
Right. Visibility helps.
But tools alone aren't enough, right? Leadership engagement was critical. Supervisors weren't just running meetings. They were actively reviewing the outstanding items during every shift handoff and in their weekly tiered meetings.
So it was constantly reinforced.
Constantly. They also publicly recognized teams that showed strong closure rates, and, importantly, they tied action item completion directly to their continuous improvement KPIs. It wasn't just a new rule, it became a behavior that was visibly valued and measured.
And the results? Did this focused effort pay off? The sources mentioned it was pretty quick.
The impact was fast and really significant. Within just 2 months of implementing this rigorously, Atlas saw a 15% reduction in repeat downtime incidents.
Wow, 15%, just by ensuring things actually got finished. That's powerful.
It really is. And connected to that, they saw a 12% improvement in overall production throughput.
And why such a direct impact?
Well, the sources highlight the mechanism clearly. By systematically completing the actions they'd identified, they were finally addressing and resolving the underlying root causes of those recurring problems. Maintenance got done on time, quality issues were fixed properly at the source, the whole operational flow just got smoother.
Makes sense. Fewer fires to fight.
Exactly. And they also noted a decrease in unplanned overtime because they weren't constantly reacting to emergencies caused by these lingering, unresolved issues.
And beyond the numbers, the hard metrics, the sources also mentioned a cultural shift.
Yeah, and this is often where the real long-term benefits come in. Embedding this discipline fostered a much stronger sense of ownership and accountability across the teams.
People felt it was actually making a difference.
Right. People felt more empowered because they could literally see progress being made every day on problems that used to just hang around and frustrate everyone.
And the meetings changed too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Meetings became sharper, much more focused on action, and crucially, on validating that things were actually completed, not just rehashing the same issues week after week.
So it shifted from problem identification to problem resolution.
Precisely. It wasn't just about finding problems anymore, it was about confirming they were genuinely fixed, built a solid foundation for sustained improvement.
The Atlas story is a really clear example, but the sources, they also broaden this out, don't they? This isn't just a manufacturing thing.
Not at all. The material makes it very clear. This focus on closing action items is a critical discipline, getting more attention across a whole spectrum of industries. Anywhere, execution and accountability matter, really.
And is there wider data supporting this, beyond the Atlas case?
Oh, yes. There's a study cited from the Lean Enterprise Institute, for example. It found that organizations with formal, structured action tracking processes see, on average, a 20% reduction in repeat issues.
20%, that's substantial.
It is, and a 15% improvement in their overall problem resolution rates. Those numbers really echo what Atlas experienced.
So it's not just anecdotal. There's research backing this up. How does this discipline play out in some of the other sectors the sources mention?
Well, in manufacturing, warehousing, supply chain, like we saw with Atlas, that structured follow-up is just paramount. Leaders in those fast-paced places know that analyzing issues or having great planning meetings doesn't mean much if the actions identified don't get done promptly.
Right, the plan needs to happen.
Exactly. Enforcing closure protocols for things like maintenance, process updates, safety improvements, it leads directly to fewer operational hiccups. In supply chain specifically, this discipline is linked to a 14% increase in on-time performance.
Okay, that's significant. What about fields that maybe seem less like physical operations, like engineering or marketing?
The sources cover those too. Engineering is highlighted. There's a Deloitte report mentioned that shows engineering firms that diligently track action items, clear owner, clear deadline, can cut project-related delays by up to 13%.
13%.
Yeah.
Makes you think, doesn't it? How many projects get derailed simply because agreed tasks just slip?
Probably more than we'd like to admit.
Oh.
And then there's marketing and service organizations. HubSpot research indicates marketing teams using structured systems for logging and closing actions cut missed deadlines by 18%.
18% fewer missed deadlines. That affects campaign success, surely.
It does, and it improves campaign success rates. In service organizations, enforcing closure for customer issue actions, that correlates to a 12% boost in customer satisfaction and retention.
So this internal discipline, this follow-through, it actually impacts the external customer experience directly.
Absolutely. That's a key leadership insight from these sources. Teams that really develop and maintain this discipline of consistently closing tasks, they cultivate a culture of follow-through that sort of ripples outward. It hits internal efficiency and the external customer relationship.
It feels like this ties into a broader trend, something the sources call execution excellence.
Yes, exactly. The sources point to this industry-wide recognition that just finding problems or spotting opportunities isn't the end game. The real focus is shifting to making sure teams have the discipline, the systems, and critically, the leadership backing to follow through.
To execute
On those corrective actions and improvements within the agreed timeframes.
And technology is playing a part here too, I assume.
Increasingly so. Digital tools are becoming common. Things like sophisticated MOS dashboards, project management platforms, even simple digital accountability boards. They're all being adopted to boost transparency and provide real-time tracking of these action items.
Makes it harder for things to get lost.
Much harder. It makes it easier for everyone, teams and leaders, to monitor progress and ensure things get completed. The sources are really consistent on this. Embedding this disciplined approach, it isn't industry-specific. Manufacturing, engineering, warehousing, marketing, you name it. It leads to stronger problem-solving, better team accountability, and real long-term productivity gains.
Okay, so let's bring this back to you, our listener. We know you're tuning in because you want actionable insights quickly. You're looking for those aha moments without getting bogged down.
And focusing on this specific discipline, this seemingly simple, but as we've seen, incredibly impactful act of driving closure on action items is a very concrete way to cut through that complexity.
How so?
Well, it helps you translate all that understanding, all the analysis you do, into actual real-world impact. It's about making sure the valuable insights you gain actually result in completed tasks and solved problems, not just more items on a list.
This deep dive has really hammered home the power of execution, specifically through that disciplined follow-through. The core message from all these sources seems crystal clear. The ultimate effectiveness of any operational system, the real productivity of any meeting, the success of any improvement effort, it all hinges on that fundamental disciplined act of closing out action items.
It truly is the indispensable bridge. Connecting identification to resolution, it might not be the flashiest part of managing operations.
Yeah, probably not.
But, as Atlas showed, and as the broader industry data confirms, its impact is undeniable, measurable, and profound.
So for our final provocative thought today, as you go back to your teams and your work, consider not just what problems or opportunities your team is identifying in your systems and discussions,
but take a moment to really think about how reliably those identified items actually turn into completed actions.
What's the real, perhaps hidden cost of those open, lingering action items in your world?
That's definitely a question worth sitting with for a bit.
Indeed. And if you'd like additional information or want to learn more about these concepts, how disciplined execution can really transform operations, please do reach out via our website. That's www.karasinnovations.com.
We really encourage you to explore how you can apply this discipline in your own context.
We'd also like to give our sincere thanks to our executive producer and founder, Lanier Johnson.
Thank you, Lanier.
And most importantly, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this conversation gave you some valuable perspective on the critical importance of driving discipline in closing those action items.